Well, we are glad that each of you guys are here today with us. And, I was just thinking about what this church is. And if you're new to our church, we want you to know you really are among friends, because we are basically just that, a bunch of friends trying to help each other when we mess up. That's pretty much what we are. We're just a bunch of friends going through life together, trying to encourage each other, and hopefully we all, at the end of this, get on the other side in the right place. That's all we're trying to do. And we are in a message series right now called Shadows of the Soul, and it's all about the dark side. It's all about the shadow side that we sometimes find ourselves in. I think it's like the opposite of the light. We're in the darkness. And even though we're saved people and we know the Lord and the Lord lives in us and we know where we're going when we die, it doesn't mean that our struggle with sin is over. As long as we're in this life and in this flesh, we will be in a battle. We'll be in a war, the Bible says, a conflict between the flesh and between the spirit. And so we're told to walk by the Spirit and not to gratify all the desires of the flesh. And so the flesh sets itself against the Spirit and against God. And we talked about the sin of anger. And those people, we put them in the back, so the sin of anger. And then we talked about the sin of pride, putting yourself ahead of others. And we talked about the sin of deceit and envy and greed and fear. And last week, gluttony. And one of our couples here in the church called me after church and said, "Hey, we're going to the Chinese buffet. You talked about it, and now we're going to test ourselves." And so never a good idea to go to a buffet. And so today we're going to talk about lust. So actually, I'm not really qualified to preach this sermon, so I asked John and Chuck if they would come and tell us about what it's like. But no, we all understand what lust is. When you think about lust, you can't help it start by thinking about sexual stuff, please don't think about that right now. But, that's what we tend to mean when we talk about this arena of lust. And it certainly does show up that way in our lives, but it's not limited to just sexual sin or sexual temptation. Lust can show up in a lot of different ways, and we're going to unpack this and help you to see that, this is a real struggle, and it's a real challenge, and it can take us down some pretty bad roads, and we can end up in some places where we never thought we might, because we give in to this sin. And so, when I think about this topic, I think about people in the Bible. There's several folks that come to mind. I think about Samson, for example. When you have gluttony and lust and you mix those together, Samson, the strongest man in the Bible, he had some big problems with women. He just did. He had some problems. You remember her name was Delilah, but that wasn't the only one. He had eyes that went for just whatever was attractive, and his parents said, "Son, you can't just fall in love with anybody. You need to make sure that these people, these girls, that they love the same Lord we love." And Samson didn't care. He just said, "I want what I want. I like what I like." And he was all the time getting into trouble. And, here this big, powerful, strongest man in the Bible. And he struggled with sexual temptation and with lust. And then think about the smartest man in the Bible, Solomon. Solomon was given this extra measure of wisdom from God. He wrote the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes. And he just had this profound insight. And yet, he had 1,000 wives. And those wives, they weren't all from his people, and they turned his heart against God and toward all of the idols of his day, and he filled Jerusalem with idols. The smartest man in the Bible. And then think of David, the most spiritual man in the Bible. A man after God's own heart. He wrote most of the book of Psalms, which are worship songs to God. And yet, you think of David and Bathsheba and that whole story, we'll look at it in just a minute, more on that later, but that whole thing is just a picture of what lust can do to us. So there's many examples of this in Scripture, many examples of this in the Bible. So let's talk about David. So in 2 Samuel chapter 11, you'll read about this story. What happens is David, he's up on a rooftop, everybody's at battle, and he looks down and he sees this beautiful woman taking a bath, and something changes in his mind, something changes in his heart that's not good. And essentially he decides, I'm going to have that woman. I'm going to have her. He doesn't care about the fact that she's already married. He just saw someone that he decided that he wanted to add to his collection. And lust does that. See, lust doesn't see people as created in the image of God. Lust sees people as commodities. And like, what can you give me, or what can you do for me to benefit me? It turns people into robots and says, I don't care what's best for them. I don't care about giving anything to them. I just want to use this person and their resources, and I want them for my own benefit or for my own pleasure. And so what transpires in this account is one bad thing after another. Of course, Bathsheba, the woman, ends up pregnant. And now he's got a problem because her husband was in battle. He wasn't home, so it's not his kid, and he's going to find out. So David concocts a plan to have her husband Uriah killed in battle. And there's all kinds of deception, and he tries to bring him back home, and it's a big problem. And David, one sin often leads to another. The lust ends up lying and deception, and then eventually murder. And that's what happens is sin, it grows. It like a snowball, it just gets larger and larger and takes over more and more of our life. And before we know it, we have to justify everything we're doing. And none of this are we seeking God's will for our life. It's just whatever feels right to me, whatever feels good to me. And then who cares about the consequences? Who cares about what happens to other people? It's just, I want what I want. It's like this little toddler within us, that just, I'm going to pitch a fit. I'm going to throw a tantrum until I get what I want. One of our daughters, Kaylee, was telling us about their little kids. She has a little 2-year-old daughter named Catherine, and Catherine was misbehaving, and doing something she wasn't supposed to do. And Kaylee, who's very gentle, very soft-hearted, she finally had enough, because eventually, toddlers will get the best of you. And she finally had enough, and she said, you're done. You keep this up. You're going to get a spanking. And Catherine looks at mommy and says, from you, not daddy. She didn't want dad. And as toddlers, they want what they want, and they get really smart at figuring how to get what they want. They use whatever tactics work on parents. And sometimes, when we don't get what we want immediately, we have our ways of pitching fits as well. And so David, he ends up very far away from the Lord. This man after God's own heart ends up for a year, not even praying to God, not worshiping God, not praying to God, just his heart becomes so calloused. He's justifying himself. And as long as you justify yourself, you don't need the Lord to justify you, because you're right in your own eyes. And eventually, remember what happens? God sends a prophet to David, a prophet named Nathan. And we don't see a lot about Nathan in the Bible, but what we do see is pretty powerful. He tells David a story about a man who had a bunch of sheep, and then his neighbor had only one. And so he wanted the neighbor's sheep so much for himself that he had the neighbor killed so he could steal the man's sheep. And Nathan says to David, what do you think should happen to that guy? David says, that man should be killed. He should be put to death. And then in this beautiful prophetic moment where the truth bomb, falls on David, Nathan says to him, David, you're the man. That's you. And then he tells him exactly what he did, about how he orchestrated this big problem. And it broke David's heart as he was confronted with the truth. It's not easy to hear the truth. When you're wrong, it's not easy to hear that. And everything within you will want to defend yourself and justify yourself. But when somebody's right, they're right. And when they're right, you don't have a defense. And so, David collapsed under the weight of that truth and repented and wrote the psalm, create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. Because he'd allowed all this to move him so far away from God. The Bible tells us to guard your heart. So we're not powerless in this war with sin. Lust, like I said, it's looking at other people and their stuff as though they exist for your use and purposes. It's not regarding what's best for other people. It's just regarding what's best for you. It's a loyalty to yourself. At all costs, whatever I need or whatever I want, I have the responsibility to just pull myself up and go out there and get it and do it. And sometimes, we look at that and think of it as ambition or leadership, and at times it can be a good thing, but at times it can just be disgusting, as it just turns people into commodities for you to exploit. We think about what's going on in the world when we hear about human trafficking, for example. And there's no care or concern about what happens in the lives of these young ladies or what their future might be like. It doesn't see these people as people. It sees these people as resources that exist for my use and my benefit. And so it leads to abuse, it leads to oppression, and it leads to exploitation. As I just go out into the world and take what I want. I go out into the world and I just decide that if it is to be, it's up to me. And it doesn't matter how this affects you. I want what I want, and I'm going to get what I want. And I'm going to make happen what I want to happen. And these are often very bold and dynamic people that command a lot of respect or attention. But at times it can lead to certainly relationship problems and even a darkness in our soul. The Bible says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. This isn't just a behavior problem or a personality quirk. At the end of this, we have a sin problem, and the problem lives within us, and it at times makes us at war with God. What we allow into our minds and into our heart, we absorb through the media and the literature and the films and the music around us. I remember hearing a preacher 30 years ago. Some of you guys might know Wayne Smith up in Lexington. I heard him say, when he was growing up in the 50s, or 60s, I should say, 60s, he was talking about the Beatles. And he said, we used to think at that time, man, these Beatles, they're really bad. I want to hold your hand. Oh, that's not good. That's bad. And this is in the 90s. He said, now we realize that wasn't so bad compared to the music that was popular then. Well, it's not getting any better, folks. And we absorb all of this into our system. We kind of have to have filters. Every 2 weeks or so, I have to replace the air filter in my air conditioner. One time my air conditioner wasn't working right, and I called Rick in our church who works on air conditioners. He said, did you replace the filter? I'm like, oh, yeah, why don't I start there? I don't know why. I thought I pulled it out, and sure enough, that was the problem. It just needed to be replaced. Because it gets jammed up. It gets clogged up with stuff, dog hair and who knows what else, and you got to replace the filter. Well, we're out there in this world around us that is not necessarily honoring God, not necessarily worshiping God, and not necessarily treating people like human beings created in the image of God. And we pick up all of this worldview because we're swimming in this aquarium. We're breathing this air. And then we have to come to a place like this, or to the silence of our own rooms with our Bibles open in front of us, and we got to say, God, replace the filter. I'm getting clogged up, in the way I'm thinking and the way I'm interacting with people. And we've got to come in and get recharged and remember who we are and what our mission is and what our responsibility is and who the people that surround us are and our need to treat people with love. The opposite of this would be loving people, caring for people, seeing them as individuals, and then sharing and being generous with them. And not to use people, but how can I be used to serve and care for others? One of the things that we might do to help us in this struggle with lust is like I said at the beginning of this message, is find a friend. Find a friend, make a friend. become a part of one of our small groups and start to get to know some people and let people hold you accountable. Let people encourage you. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, Solomon says, 2 are better than one. If either of them falls down, the other one can help them up. We were walking around Disney the other day, and there was, somebody working at the front of the front of the park by themselves, and they were just, standing under an umbrella and, this way, friends. This way, friend. They're just standing there by themselves. I was like, oh, can you imagine 8 hours? I would rather bag groceries. I would rather mop floors. I would rather do about anything than just stand here for 8 hours. This way, friends. This way, friend. Then we walked up to where the monorail is, and there's 2 people up there, and they're kind of laughing and talking while they're helping everybody on. When there's not a monorail there, they're just kind of standing there for 5 minutes, and they're laughing and talking. I was like, look at that. That's so much better. Having somebody to spend the day with. I mean, even if you don't know this person very well that you're working with, just to not be by yourself. I don't know if you guys are like that or not, or if it's just me, but 2 are better than 1. There's times when you need to be alone. There's times when you need just you and God, or you just are done with people and you just need, to turn on Matlock or Columbo or something and just let your mind relax. But it's not good to go through life by yourself. I mean, one of the first things God ever said to humanity was, Adam, it's not good for you to be alone. He created a helper. He created a mate. He created a partner. That doesn't mean you have to get married, but you do need a friend. You need somebody in your life that will walk on this journey with you, that doesn't see you as just a resource, somebody to give me a ride when I'm in need, or somebody to take me to the grocery when I don't have a ride. Somebody that cares about you as a person. Somebody that invests in you, and somebody that you can invest your life in. That's the opposite of lust. And then, we're all going to be tempted at times in all kinds of ways. This is just one of the ways, but we're all going to be tempted. And we might do well to remember what Joseph did in this moment. Remember when Potiphar's wife was having a problem? She was, looking at Joseph and thought, oh, he's handsome. Oh, he's young. Oh, he's, an international. He's attractive. And she started to put the moves on Joseph. And Joseph had every reason to give in. I mean, what is he going to do? Say, whoa, I wasn't raised this way. Who raised you? You mean the people that sold you into slavery? I mean, your own family betrayed you. So, do you have any responsibility to them anymore? What, are you going to look back to your past and say, oh, I was raised in such a loving home? No, you weren't. Your brothers despised you and hated you, and they wanted to kill you, but instead they just turned you into a commodity to sell. They took the money and went out and had drinks on you, literally on you. And now he finds himself in a distant country where nobody knows the Lord that he serves. He had every reason. And remember, he's a young man. And this older woman who's his boss's wife, his boss, he could have easily justified and said, well, what was I supposed to do? If I refuse this woman, I could end up in prison or end up killed. He's 1,000 miles away from accountability. He's literally he's in the same place the prodigal son was, and we know what the prodigal son did. Joseph could have easily, but he didn't. He said, how can I do this against my master, Potiphar, and against my God? How can I? Because it doesn't matter where you go, God is always there. You can't run so far away that God doesn't know who you are or what you're doing. Doesn't matter where you are on this earth, God is always with us. And Joseph understood that. And in that moment of temptation, he didn't stand there and try to, well, let me reason with this. What do you think I should do? I need some kind of principle that I could, help me in this moment. He just ran. The Bible tells us to flee sexual immorality. Don't try to reason with it. Don't try to stand up and be strong against it. It's just get yourself out of there. Just get away from it. He literally left his coat and ran. Joseph's coat is always getting him into trouble. And what's amazing about that moment is he actually ends up getting thrown into prison anyway. Now, he probably, if he really was trying to, force himself on Potiphar's wife like she was saying, he probably should have been put to death. But for whatever reasons, Potiphar didn't have him put to death. He had him put in prison. Maybe Potiphar knew. Because the Bible says that when Joseph was in charge, Potiphar didn't have to worry about anything. God was with Joseph, and Joseph just had this mind for making things right, making things better. And Potiphar, it was the best thing that ever happened to Potiphar, having Joseph in his home. You know, we should be a blessing to the people that we interact with. We should make their lives better. Whether that's at work, or in our communities, or in our families, or in our churches. The fact that God is in us and we walk with the Lord and the Lord is walking with us, we should improve society, improve our school systems, improve our government. We should be a salt and light in our community. And Joseph was. And in spite of that, somebody saw him as an object, a commodity to be used, not to be treated as a person. And at the end of the day, he ran away from this because it can overtake and destroy you really quick. You're playing with fire. And you know, in spite of that, he ended up in prison. He could have been very upset with God. Man, I did the right thing. This isn't fair. Where is God? Why isn't he with me? Why didn't God deliver me? Why didn't God protect me? He could have easily gone down that road that all of us have gone down before. I did the right thing, and this is the response I get. I lose my job, or I lose my marriage, or I lose my... Well, if that's what you get for doing the right thing, then forget this. But his time in prison was temporary. God had a fantastic plan for Joseph that would not only bring about his own salvation, but the salvation of his people. But Joseph, all he knows is, what am I doing right now, and what's happening to me right now? And in that moment, he fled, he left, he escaped. And the Bible tells us that no temptation has overtaken you except what is common for man, meaning that whatever you're tempted with, it's not any different than everybody else. You may say, oh, but you don't understand my temptation. No, I might not. I really might not. I might not be tempted by the same things you are, but there are others in this world who do, who have, and we all know what it's like to want to give in to our own selfish desires. We all know what it's like to want to choose our own way. You know, Jesus said, go out into the world, preach the gospel to all creation. He said, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to what? Obey. Teaching them to obey everything I've taught you. And so, when we say no to the flesh and we say yes to God and we obey, we become stronger and stronger and able to help others in their struggle with sin. So flee temptation. And then the Bible tells us to renew our minds in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. What are you putting in your mind? What are you allowing to spin around? You know, David, when he walked up there on that patio and he saw beautiful Bathsheba, the problem was the battle was in his mind, and he didn't fight it there. He gave in to the temptation. He should have stopped right in that moment and moved away, fled the temptation. He should have moved away from it. But he didn't. He let his mind dwell on this. And one sin led to another, and it took him further than he wanted to go. It kept him a lot longer than he wanted to stay, and it cost him a whole lot more than he wanted to pay. And it will do the same to us. That's why we got to guard our hearts. And where two are gathered together, you know, there's strength. When I fall down, you can pick me up. When you fall down, I'm there to pick you up. And then flee the temptation, and then renew our mind. You know, I'm going to tell you, I told this story before a long time ago, and you're going to hear this, you'll be like, that didn't happen. And I'm telling you, it happened. You can ask my wife, she never lies. Even when I want her to, she doesn't lie, right? So I'm telling you, this is one of those preacher stories that you hear a preacher say, and you're like, I don't know about that. But I'm telling you, it happened exactly the way I'm telling it. Years ago, we were in a short ministry in Indiana, in a cornfield. I should have known I can't live in a cornfield. I just can't do it. I mean, there's nothing there. You guys have been up there in northern Indiana? I mean, it's great people, wonderful people, amazing coleslaw, you know, I mean, it's super people. They're just, you know, great salt of the earth people, but I can't live in a cornfield. I just can't do it. The whole time I'm thinking, why am I not in New York? Why am I not in Texas? Why am I not in Florida? Why am I not in California? Why am I in Indiana? It's just, okay, it's my problem, not yours. I get it, right? And so we're in this church, and it's a little country church. This is way early when we're first starting out. We're just barely having kids, and we're in this little white country church, like right in the home of Gaither land. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about, others don't. That's fine. All right, but we are in the middle of nowhere in this little country church, and we're just loving God and loving people and trying our best to help this little church grow. And we had this a young family start coming to church. And I got to know them, and now she was really excited about coming to church and really excited about the Lord. He was not. You could tell. You can just tell, like, she's dragging him to church, but it's fine. The Lord will use that, right? A lot of you guys, you started that way. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your wife. And so the Lord will use that, and so I can tell she's excited. He doesn't really want to be there, but he's coming. And then they were there for maybe a couple of months, 2 months or so. And then one Friday night, I got a call at our house from her, and she's in tears. And she's like, I need you to come over, And I'm like, okay, something's wrong. I don't know what it is. But so I just told my wife, I was like, I don't know what's going on, but she's asking me to come to her house. So I went to her house, and man, it was awkward. It's like, when you walk in and like you can cut it with a knife, it's just, there's tension. And I walked in, I sat down on the couch, and I'm like, what's going on? What's the problem? And she's got some papers in her hands, and she's like crying, and her voice is not right. And he's sitting there just like this, doesn't want to look at me in the eyes. Well, this is back like in the 90s, and there was pay-per-view back then where you could order stuff. Right? You can order dumb stuff, just movies, and it's before streaming, okay? Imagine there was a time before streaming. And, well, on this bill, it had 2 adult movies that he had rented in the middle of the night. And it was right there on the, you would think like it would be marked out or something, but it was right there on the thing. And she opened the bill, and she saw this, and she confronted him. And he didn't have any defense, so he just wasn't talking. And I tried to calm him down. I'm like, okay, all right, I understand. I try not to make too much out of it. It's every man's battle. We get it, okay. But I was like, all right, look, you have to understand, sir, that your wife is very hurt right now, and she's very upset. And you have to understand that from her perspective, like, this is a violation. What are you saying about her? What are you saying about your marriage? He understood, and I was like, really the right thing to do right now is to repent, tell God, your wife, and that you were wrong and you're sorry, and he kind of just shook his head, sort of, because I don't think he really cared. I didn't want to be in trouble, but I don't think he really cared about God so much. And so I tried to lead him through the best of that I could. And then she was like mad, like, yeah, but what are we going to do? What's going to change? And I was like, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but this is what I might do, is maybe just cut off, because we found out in the conversation that it wasn't just limited to pay-per-view television, the satellite dish, but it was also on his computer as well. Those 2 things were the doorway in. I was like, you got to shut the doorway. You don't even want the temptation available to you. So my suggestion is just cut your satellite for a couple months. Just maybe a month, whatever. I don't know, a month, 2 months. Just cancel your satellite service for a while, or unplug it, whatever you got to do, and just don't have you're trying to rebuild trust in your marriage. You're going to lose your marriage. And she's like, what are we going to do? And I was like, that's a real thing you could do. Just now you don't have it available to you. And I was like, now this is back when internet was brand new. Like, not everybody had it. A lot of people didn't have it. And I was like, just cut off your internet service. It's like $9 a month. Just cut your internet service, cut your satellite service for like a month, 2 months, whatever. Make a decision of how long, and just cut those things out. And then your wife and I don't even have it available to me anymore, at least not this way. So I was like, that's something real and tangible you could do. It seemed sensible at the time. And I just remember like being so surprised when he looked at me and said, yeah, I'm not doing that. I was like, okay. And his wife just like, you could just see the defeat. And so it was one of those moments where I'm like, I don't know, I just decided, okay, I need to teach him a lesson by how I respond to this. So I just grabbed my Bible and I was like, all right, well, I don't know, I'll see you guys later. I love you all and I hope this works out. And as I'm walking to the door, she's like, what are you doing? Why are you leaving? I was like, look, you asked me what I think you should do. I told you what I think you should do, and you said you're not going to do it, so why am I here? It was a little bit like Jesus. I wasn't angry. It was like, I want to teach a lesson. Like Jesus said, shake the dust off your feet. I'm like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to shake your dust off my feet. What should we do? It's like going to the doctor. What do you think I should do? And he's like, well, you should stop eating cinnamon rolls from Catfish. Oh my goodness, I discovered those. Oh my goodness. I did. Why didn't you tell me? I'm glad you didn't tell me. Don't tell me. So I was like, oh, I'm just going to shake the dust off. I'm like, well, you said you didn't want to do it, so I'm not going to bother you. This is you. This is your life. This is your marriage. And I just left. I was like anxious about it because I'm not like that, but I'm like, I feel like I need to do that. So I just got up and I left. I don't know, what's going to happen next, but it's not my problem. I mean, it's my problem. I'm a pastor, but it's not my problem. But it's my problem. Anyway, so Saturday, the next day happens. Sunday morning comes, and I'm out there at the front greeting people as they come into the church, and she, the wife, comes up with her 2 little girls, and Dad's not with her. I'm like, interesting. He's not even coming. Because a lot of times when guys get caught, they all of a sudden get religious. I've baptized a lot of guys that, well, they were sorry. And they needed their wife to see they were sorry, and so they get baptized hoping that, this will make things right. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, but because it's got to be legitimate, it's got to be real. It can't just be so that my wife will quit bothering me or so that she'll see that I'm sorry. Well, she comes up by herself with her girls, and I'm like, hey, how was your weekend? I'm really curious, like, what happened? I didn't say what happened because it's not appropriate to like, what happened? But I'm curious what happened. I'm like, how was your weekend? I see that your husband's not with you. And she'd calmed down. She wasn't in that frantic state she was on Friday, but she looked at me and she said, it was the weirdest thing yesterday. I'm like, oh yeah? She said, you remember that storm we had Saturday evening? I was like, we didn't have a storm. I'm like, a storm? I'm like, oh yeah, it was like a Florida storm. It was like 15 minutes. It was really fast. I'm not even sure that we got rain in our neighborhood. But it was just like a gray cloud that went past. I barely remember. Like, I remember that. She said lightning struck our house. I was like, lightning struck your house? Like, you hear of that, but you don't really meet people that lightning struck their house. She said it struck the satellite dish. And I guess the electricity came down somehow, and the receiver, the satellite receiver, started smoking, and the TV quit working, and the computer. And that was the only thing in the house that was affected. Nothing else in the house was affected. Just the satellite, just the TV, and just the computer. Oh, none of it works now. And I say, you're kidding me. Do you think God's trying to teach your husband something? I'll never forget the surprised look on her face, and she said, I hadn't even thought of that. I was like, how could you not think of that? If the preacher comes to your house and says, you should not use your satellite and your computer or your television, and you say, I don't care, I'll do what I want, and the next day it gets struck by lightning, like, I gotta be careful what I say. And that was just one of those weird moments that's so much bigger than me. I don't think it has anything to do with me. And the reality is probably all of us should be struck by lightning. If God was just giving us what we deserved, you would be struck by lightning. Don't look at me like that. You would be struck by lightning for something. But aren't you glad that God is also a God of grace and a God of restoration, a God of mercy? We don't name our church judgment. We name our church mercy, because that's what God offers to us in His grace, His forgiveness. But we got to start treating people like they matter. We can't treat people like they're nameless, faceless settlers or robots out there. Treat God the way God's treated us. Be strong, be powerful, be brave, be bold, be a prophet. But be a prophet of the Lord. And you got to surrender, you got to humble yourself before God. Let's stand together. We're going to sing a song together as we come to this ending of our service, Oh the Cross, to remember what God has done for us and how God has